It is 6 p.m. I'm going to start the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency meeting of 5:23. And I'm going to call to order and roll call. Somebody.
Director Cassidy.
Here.
Director Dillis.
Here.
Director Ankford.
Here.
Director Koenig is absent. Director Koopman.
Here.
Director McPherson, Supervisor McPherson is ill and will not be attending tonight. He's absent. Director Perry.
Here.
Director Pollock.
Here.
Director Smalley.
Here.
Director Stiles.
Here.
And I'm just looking to see from our online participants if we have alternate director Ackerman, whether I believe she plans to participate. Let me see if she's joined us.
If she does, she would be a voting member, I think, right?
Correct.
Correct.
A little lag in the system here. I do not see her yet.
Okay.
I do see in a non-voting capacity, alternate director Hutchinson is joining us online as well.
All right, thank you. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Hearing none. Oral communications on matters not on the agenda. Do we have anyone sitting here or anyone joining us on Zoom?
We do have some
Teams.
folks joining us on Zoom. I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, I'm gonna take that as a no. Approval of minutes. Consent agenda, actually, number 2.1. Do I hear a motion?
Wait, there, my name's missing on it was held, so I could vote and then my vote wasn't. I didn't remember voting.
Director Koopman, could you say that again? I'm sorry.
Director Koopman was here.
Yeah, you delayed the vote until I was here and then my vote wasn't recorded. I'll do last night.
Noted, okay. We will.
I move the consent agenda with that correction.
Second.
All right. Is Cassidy and Stiles. Were they a folk rap? Back in the 70s? Cassidy and Stiles, I remember them, they were great.
And just styles.
Okay, presentations. Rob, the groundwater sustainability program
I
update.
think we need, since
Oh,
we're
sorry.
still hybrid, I think we need to do the roll call vote.
Oh, that's right. Do we have any directors on hybrid voting?
Well, we don't have any directors doing hybrid voting because Director Ackerman, who I think will participate, is not here yet. So Terry, I'll look to you. In that scenario, do you recommend a roll call or?
If we had a unanimous vote, then we don't have to do the roll call because then we could say everyone in the room voted. And if we don't have a unanimous vote, then we have to do the roll call because the public wants to know who's voting for what.
Do we have unanimity?
Yes.
Got
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Groundwater sustainability program update.
I'm gonna promote Rob so he can share his screen here. Just a minute, we've got a lag occurring here for whatever reason.
We still like the new look.
Are these units from Scottsville or you guys bring them?
They brought them.
Does that work, Rob? Still not seeing it? Well, let's give it one more shot. If not, I know I have your presentation, so I can share it as well. I can see it.
We're gonna do this.
Positive thinking.
Yes, positive thinking.
It is being challenging this evening, that's for sure.
Chris, the entertainment leaves a little bit to be desired.
I know, well, if I have my guitar.
We've got styles.
Yeah, it's all together. We're going.
Oh, sorry, Cassidy is that.
Was it?
I do notice we do have a gentleman who's running for 5th District Supervisor. I believe Christopher Bradford
Hello, good to see you.
slipped in the back there.
Watching the good work here.
Okay, here we go. We got showtime.
Let's go with. Mine, okay.
Recording in progress.
It's not me for once. My phone, iPad.
Okay,
Here we go.
now for the moment you've all been waiting.
Lives up to all the.
I'm gonna share my screen, so
Okay.
folks online can see what's going on.
Okay.
Take this out of your way. All right.
So just a few updates for you. You have to drive that too. First thing I wanted to point out tonight was a little bit about just an observation on groundwater production in the basin. So if you look at the history that we have in the groundwater sustainability plan and the annual report, we report since 1985. So we're closing in on 40 years worth of production information. And Sigma is 10 years old this year. So when we collect our groundwater production data for the current water year, we're gonna have 10 years worth of information post Sigma. And it's always been clear that we had this trend from the 1980s into 2001, that's sort of the peak groundwater use, and then we've had this downward trend, and then things have somewhat stabilized. But I thought it was really interesting to take a look at it from a 10-year perspective. If you break this down by decade, you can really kind of see the trend. And really, since Sigma passed, you can see that groundwater production in the 9-year period is 2,812 acre feet per year is the average. So when you look at the groundwater sustainability plan, the projected sustainable yield of the basin is 2,800 acre feet. So we're right in that vicinity. I'll say that there's still work to be done. You know, we don't know what the future brings. And in particular, we still have to break that value down by the 4 aquifers that we actually produce water from. And one of those is Lompico. And we're currently about 25% above what our objective is for that particular aquifer. So we can't sit on our laurels, but I think it's very interesting information, again, from the perspective of Sigma, because the compliance point is the effective date, which is January 1st of 2015. So in particular, in our case, we have this issue with interconnected surface water. And yes, groundwater pumping obviously affects surface water at some point. But really the point from which you're judged is that December 2015 date. So you can see that we've actually been trending down for 2+ decades now. And so I think that this base is on a strong path to sustainability. So I just wanted to point out observation, not terribly statistical, but just very interesting to me anyway. So we are starting the 2024 dry season monitoring. CBEC went out and investigated all the gauges from last year. There was fortunately no storm damage this year, so there were no additional costs associated with rebuilding stations. One thing I'd point on the left is that you do get a lot of sedimentation over the winter. So you get these high flows and they drop sand. So I'm gonna stand up to point these out for those of you who can see this side of the room. So you can see here at Ziente Creek, there's a lot of sediment here at the base of this. So they just have to go in and muck this out so they can clean it up. And so when they install the instrumentation, then they're getting a good reading from the creek. So that has happened. We deployed monitors on May 15th, so we're out recording information right now. The county of Santa Cruz went out yesterday and today to monitor the groundwater dependent ecosystems. So they're continuing to collect data. I think we're on our third year or maybe even close to fourth year at this point. It's time to actually start looking at that information. So, the county actually invests a lot of time going out and measuring these twice a year, a lot of staff time. So we want to see what it's telling us and decide if there are any directions that we want to change or continue doing the monitoring as we are. So these are the creek measurements. We've been tracking this.
Sorry, Rob, just trying to make that a little bit.
So when we go out, we collect a measurement in real time on that particular day. So this is May 15th roughly, for 2021, 22, 23, and 24 now. So we can see the differences between those two dry years and these two nice wet years. On your left is the San Lorenzo River. So we measure it up just above Love Creek, which is where in the basin before we really start producing much groundwater. So it's a good indicator of what flows are like coming into the groundwater basin. And then it's measured by the USGS. So this is actually the data pulled from the USGS website for that day at Big Trees. So you can see that the flow in San Lorenzo Creek, San Lorenzo River at Love Creek was 50 cubic feet a second, a little bit less than last year. San Lorenzo River, 87. Again, less than last year, but still pretty good numbers compared to previous years. Newell Creek is over 5 cubic feet a second. I assume, Heidi, that's maintenance by the city. That's activities. They release water from the reservoir for maintenance purposes. Ziente Creek, again, down at about 10. And Bean Creek and Mount Herman Camp at about 6. So again, these are good numbers. This is a good, slightly above normal year. So that's how we're heading into the year in terms of hydrology. Then I want to talk a little bit about groundwater levels. And as a reminder, we look at two different systems here. We have a shallow aquifer system, which is composed really of Santa Margarita sandstone. And you can see these 4 different areas, Quail Hollow, the Olympia, Mount Herman, Scotts Valley, and the North Scotts Valley area, which is where we have the Santa Margarita. What you don't see on this map, we don't have outcrops of Santa Margarita. The deeper zone then is primarily Lompico and Butano down again in the Scotts Valley area. Everything north of Bean Creek, that's sort of teal colored, that's all Monterey Formation, that's not aquifer. And as a consequence, we don't have any deep production wells there. We have limited, domestic use and some small water systems, but very low yields. So we really don't have much information for that particular area. So if we look at the shallow aquifer system, and again, we've started doing this, and these hydrographs pick up in 2015, right? So let's judge this by what's happening post-Sigma. These green dots measurement our spring elevations, primarily the high point, but you can always get some event, that causes that to change, but they typically represent the high point in the basin. We mark those in red, so you can kind of track it from year to year. I always think that's the most appropriate place to be judging the condition of the basin. And so we can see compared to the previous year, 2023, we are about the same level in Quail Hollow and Pasatiempo, the shallow well at Pasatiempo. The Olympia well is up pretty substantially, and Scotts Valley monitoring well is down just a little bit, but up from the previous 2 years. So 3 of the 4 wells that we're monitoring higher levels this year. And again, the hydrology was just, kind of just a little above normal this year. So this is really good sign still. Groundwater basins continuing to recover over those last couple of dry years. And in the deeper zones, again, we're seeing a similar trend. This is a well in the Lompico Formation. We're continuing to see increasing water levels there. Here's the deeper well at Pasatiempo, seeing water levels come up pretty significantly over here. The Cannon well has been pretty static. That hasn't changed much. That's in the Butano up the hill. And then finally, Scotts Valley Water District 9, which is the only production well has existed essentially in the Monterey Formation. That's been inactive for a number of years. You can just see it's just continuing to have this slight increase through time. So again, it's just a really tight formation, doesn't recover very quickly, but again, all good news for this year, coming in from last year. I showed you last time that we, in February, that we started downloading data, or collecting data from the dedicated monitoring well network that we put in. And so we had data from really before the wet season. What we can see here is we went out and downloaded in early May with the county and San Lorenzo Valley staff, downloaded these water levels from these wells. And it's pretty interesting, you know, you can start to tell some things about differences in the system. So here's a well on Bar Drive. It's in a really sandy area, and it's sitting right on top of the Monterey Formation. It's really shallow, only about 40 feet deep or so. And then here's a well at the former Quail Hollow production well site. And then we have another one at Randall Morgan, the old quarry. And so just kind of interesting, the responses that we're seeing in the basin, for example, with Bar Drive, we're starting to see water levels recover very strongly right after January 1st. Whereas we're not starting to see that recovery until February in the other wells. And then we get a strong recovery and it peaks at the beginning of March and starts to go down, as opposed to some of the other where we're seeing that not happen until April. So we're starting to, you know, through time, we'll learn a little bit more about how the system behaves when you get these recharge events. Because these are shallow monitoring wells, they're not really around a production well, so they're not under the influence of that pumping. This is sort of what's happening naturally in the system. So we do have some additional monitoring going on this year, and I just kind of want to walk through some of this. This is why I was hoping I could do my PowerPoint so I could use a pointer because it's a little hard to follow. But the basic map shows our existing monitoring network with some additional points that I put on here. The key there is on the right-hand side. So we have proposed to fill a data gap. We have a data gap that we identified in the groundwater sustainability plan for monitoring stream flow on Carbonera Creek. And we have available budget. It's been identified in the GSP for a number of years. We're going to start our plan evaluation within the next 2 years. So it really is time to start collecting that data so we can look at the utility of having that. So we're proposing to install a gauge at Carbonera Creek, at Carbonero Way, where the old USGS gauge is located. And we're expecting to do that here in the next month or so, pending approval of the budget. So that's a budget item that you should be aware of. So that would be right down here. And what I like about that is it's actually near an existing Scotts Valley monitoring well. So not only will it give us data on the stream itself, but it'll also give us a little more information on interconnected surface waters, which is one of those things that we're going to have to address as the state continues to develop its guidelines. We're expected to see some guidelines later this summer on that topic. So this will put us in the position to collect that information. We're also looking at doing some additional manual measurements. So when we're out and collecting data from these loggers, which is collecting that information, you know, throughout the whole time, we also want to look at what's happening on the rest of the stream with respect to, as we go through the dry season, impacts potentially pumping. So we currently have a dedicated logger down on Ziente Creek, just before it enters Bean Creek, but we really don't have much information up Ziente Creek. And in particular, we know we have production wells in the Quail Hollow and in the Olympia well fields. So this would help supplement, again, that information about interconnected surface waters. So this would be added to the existing monitoring that's going on out there when they're collecting downloading the data. They'll go to these sites and collect a spot measurement. Again, all of that will tie in then to some additional data loggers that we're going to install. So San Lorenzo Valley Water District has this Quail Hollow MWA. In our groundwater sustainability plan, we actually identified that we were going to outfit it with a logger to continuously collect data, but that had not been done yet. So we had available budget this year because we were under budget on that monitoring category. So we were able to purchase a data logger and install that about a month ago. In addition to that, San Lorenzo Valley has an old production well, Olympia 1, that really had some characteristics that I liked about it. It's pretty shallow, and it's in close proximity, but not right on top of their two existing production wells, 2 and 3. Olympia 3 is actually one of our representative monitoring wells. I'm not a fan of using production wells for representative monitoring points. You do it when you have to. But here was an opportunity to use an existing well, and again, simply outfitting it with the pressure transducer, which I think will help give us a lot of better information. So those two have been deployed about a month ago, and so we'll be able to collect data from those as well. And so throughout the course of the year, as the production happens in these two well fields, we're gonna have information from dedicated monitoring wells that's being recorded and additional stream information. So I think that's all gonna be very important, especially as we start our periodic evaluation again in a couple of years. And the final area is in domestic wells. So Santa Cruz County, somebody knew somebody that lived up on Weston Road, so it just really worked out fantastic. They gave access to county staff, they went out and collected their first measurement. So we're hopeful that that's actually going to be a domestic well, we'll be able to add a network and close up that data gap on Weston Road. So with all of that, the only data gap, from the groundwater sustainability plan is a deep monitoring well in the Batonic Formation. So the rest of them are getting filled up this year. So that's really exciting news. So one last slide that I just wanted to show you, again, just to give you an example. So we have this data management system that we built, and it's a pretty useful tool. So here, for example, I'm able to take the 3 wells, possibly the Olympia 1, 2, and 3. And we have data here shown back to 1990, and you can superimpose those on each other so you can see how they behave relatively. And 2 and 3 are the production wells, and they're shown in the blue and the green. And these are static levels. But when you're producing the recovery time, et cetera, you just don't know. You also have 2 wells that are near each other. So essentially, again, we've been using one of these 3 for purposes of measuring our sustainable management criteria. But right nearby is Olympia 1, shown in red there. And you can see that this is the information I would be preferring to look at if I'm trying to see what the response is in the basin. Rather than a highly localized effect from pumping wells, this is going to be potentially better information. So again, this is where we install the data logger so we can improve the quality of that.
Great. Okay, good information. Anyone have questions?
Yeah, well, can we move our representative monitoring, site over to the Olympia 1 without enough problems?
You wouldn't, we're gonna continue to monitor both. I mean, Santa Rosa Valley Water District measures these anyway. But what we'll do is now that we have this opportunity, we'll be able to track it for the next couple of years. And then when we go through the periodic evaluation, we can make a decision about what we want to do. Changing a representative monitoring point like that wouldn't really constitute a major change to the GSP, so it wouldn't be a problem from that perspective.
Any members of the public have anything to add? Anyone on Zoom or anybody in the audience?
I'm gonna
Or questions?
look over at Zoom and see if we have any hands going up. We give it a minute because it is running slow for whatever reason. Not seeing any hands in the room, and I'm not seeing any hands on.
Okay. All right, thank you very much, Rob. I'm gonna move to general, which is, we have a surprise situation where we have to fill a vacancy. Chair Mahood had a sudden step away, moved out of the area that she represented. So we've lost her. And I've got later during director's reports, I'll read a thank you letter that we're going to send her. But quickly, I'll say she was an incredible addition to the board. She really pushed everybody, I think. I learned a lot from her. I think this board, I compliment the board and staff in response. I think it made us all a better agency. I think that we took everything very positively and her input was just, special. And personally, I learned a lot from being her partner on the executive team. She's quite a woman. But anyway, so we have the situation where as vice chair, I became the chair for this meeting. And Director Smalley is her replacement in some ways, we'll say. We traditionally do the chair and vice chair as the two major, let's say, contributing agencies to the Santa Margarita. And so just two people talking. I had a short conversation with Director Smalley, and do you wanna?
Sure. First, I wanted to address the question that I think some folks have in their mind is, Gail left? What? She realized that she couldn't continue to live where she was in Felton. She had an acre of property. She had a very nice house, very well landscaped, but with some declining health issues, realized she couldn't continue to maintain that. She has sold her place and has moved to SoCal instead. She did tell me that between her work with San Lorenzo Valley Water District and the Santa Margarita Agency, it was a very good transition for her, being the professor of geology at Stanford University into retirement, because it still kept her mentally engaged and forced her to learn another part of the discipline, which she had no academic background in. So she appreciated being here also.
Oh, that's great.
So-
Well said.
So with that, and with what Chris had said earlier, I think we're now on to nominating for.
Yes.
So I would like to nominate Mr. Perry to be president now.
Okay.
Since I don't wish to step into that role, I have not been anywhere near as well connected with the group, having not been on the board, this board last year. So
Second that.
Okay.
May
I would
may I-
ask, or Terry could answer, one
Do it.
procedural order here. Go ahead, Terry.
So the motion would be to accept Perry's resignation, Chair Perry, or Vice Chair's resignation, and then appoint him as chair. Because we gotta remove you first to allow you to be.
he can't be in both?
No, you
Okay,
can't do
all
that.
right.
You're gonna have to be vice chair.
It would all be done in one motion, but we're essentially having you resign or step down and then step up.
I resign as vice chair.
I think the board should act on that, correct? The board should vote on that.
Let's do it all in one vote, because if they don't both happen, we're gonna have a disaster.
Yeah.
Yes. Since we then don't have
So,
a chair tonight.
right, so we're gonna have a two-prong motion. The first prong would be to accept your resignation and then to move you, appoint you as chair. That would be one motion and one vote.
You wanna make that motion, Mark, again?
Yes, but I'd like to have Chris, decline his role as vice chair, and, nominate him to be chair of this organization.
Okay, do I have a second? I'll second it. Okay. All those in favor?
I
I for myself. Okay. No one opposed? All right. And then, now do we appoint a vice
And
chair?
we don't have an online member.
I will double check. We did not a minute ago.
She hasn't responded to a text.
We
that I
do
sent.
not have any,
Okay.
yeah, director, or alternate director Ackerman is not online, so everybody's in the room.
Okay,
So
good. So
now,
we have a unanimous vote on that.
yes, and now we need a nomination on vice chair and then a vote on it.
I would nominate Director Smalley as vice chair.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? None? Okay, we did it. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody. Okay, 4.2, the financial reserves policy. Who's gonna take this? Nick?
I'm gonna start this and Nick can add to it. SEPSA has reported to the board at the last meeting when the preliminary budget was proposed. We noted that there had been some discussions about establishing a reserve policy for the agency. The general intent of the reserve policy is just to better guide staff in terms of what the appropriate targets were for maintaining reserves, just as a matter of policy, fiscal responsibility, and emergency preparedness. It's recommended that the agency have a reserve policy, and so we put together a short policy that is intended to both guide us during the annual budget process, but also look towards the long-term financial planning of the agency. And so as you'll see in the policy itself, there is a recommended minimum and maximum in there, a minimum of 25% of the operating expense, a maximum of 50% of operating expenses. And I think that as reflected in language in the policy, it is intended to recognize that there is going to be variability annually in terms of what the anticipated expenses are. And so staff anticipates that there may need to be some future flexibility as we implement the policy. Looking back towards last year, it's a good example of, we had a combination of revenue coming in from grants with a lot of construction expenses at the start of the year. We did the cash flow analysis at that time. I think certainly in the future, we hope there are instances where the agency will have grant funding again. We know that there's a prolonged delay in grant funding reimbursement. So we're looking towards the policy for general guidance, but with the understanding that obviously the circumstances at the time, as we're developing the annual budget, will inform where these levels are at. So I think that sort of hits the main points. It was developed in partnership with Nick Kearns, the agency treasurer. So Nick, if there's anything I missed in there, feel free to add.
I think you did a good job summarizing it. I'd call attention to a couple of the benefits of having it. One of the major benefits from my perspective is it helps, the contributing agencies, us work within certain expectations on timelines, and gives Santa Margarita, the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency, some flexibility in terms of being able to implement decisions throughout the year. Contributing agencies go back to their roles. And then lastly, operationally, when we do have more cash, it gives us a framework of what we can put to longer use. That's an investment in something like class or something that would have liquidity, but it could be tied up. Depending on the levels, it gives us the opportunity to consider those.
And I think the one thing I meant to add in there, but it's mentioned in the memo itself, is that we're also looking at trying to minimize the year-to-year fluctuations in the agency contribution. So it's not, on the low end one year and then having to spike up in the next year because of activity. It's looking over a multi-year process to try to, there will always be some fluctuation, but to try to avoid a roller coaster in terms of what the individual agencies are.
Are there any questions for the Doug?
Two, so we defined it as operating expenses. I know we don't anticipate being an agency that makes a lot of capital investments. We're looking to the member agencies and other participating agencies to take the lead on that stuff. Do we comprehend, but I notice also in the budget, there occasionally are capital outlays. Do we anticipate just focusing on operating specifically and kind of setting aside capital, mindful that it would typically be grant reimbursed, or are we including all the expense items in the formula here?
Yeah, there was some discussion about that in framing it up and whether or not within that target range to include or exclude capital. We included it for now. I think that it may be similar to the example that I gave before. I think that's where the biggest sort of short-term expenses are gonna come into play. You know, if we were in a scenario where we had to expand the monitoring network or take some other action there. And I think as a, you know, we would have to go back and do something similar to the cash flow analysis that we did last year of when the timing of that is happening, and particularly if it's grant reimbursed, how that factors into the cycle. So again, Nick, I don't know if you want to expand upon that, but.
Yeah, one thought when we were considering that was, you know, if the agency were to have to do any significant capital investment, that there'd probably be a condition that it maintain a separate capital reserve. So.
I would agree with that. All right. Although that'd be something we'd want to consider as a group at the time. The second question, this had to do with reminding me where we're at on treasury management guidelines. Since we're now going to be consciously maintaining a balance and interest rates are non-zero. And have we developed those? I'm just trying to remember, have we developed those or are they in development or?
We have talked about developing an investment policy. It is not developed yet. And so we wanted to start with the reserve policy and then follow up with an investment policy.
So date for the date?
If we don't have a policy, I think somewhere in the governing documents says that
Scotts Valley's policy.
Scotts Valley policy will apply because you're the business arm. Scotts Valley Water District is the business arm, so there probably is policy
By default,
by default.
it'd be nice if that were visible to us. Okay.
We can make that available, Nick can make that available to the
That'd be done.
email. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Pretty, very conservative, but Nick's been expanding it of late and in a good way.
I'll share that.
Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, anybody else? Yes, boy, that was tight, but I'm gonna give it to you. It's simultaneous.
It doesn't, we don't have any clear indications that there's going to be capital outlays coming at us from new requirements or anything like that. I mean, it kind of, we put the system in place that we were required to put in place and our aquifers kind of in balance. So I would kind of anticipate that things are gonna steady out here quite a bit unless there's some new stuff that comes up. If new stuff comes up, we would deal with that in the future. So I'm kind of, you know, surprised that we want to put away a large amount of money for that part of it. But I know that the 5-year thing is supposed to be a bigger deal than the regular reporting, but we're already doing modeling and hydrographs nearly every year. So I'm not seeing that there's a huge amount of additional work in the 5th year above and beyond. If we were going to change things because we're not in compliance, but we're in compliance. We can almost rubber stamp the previous report. And we have to go over the whole thing and look at it and make sure there's no omissions or any, we have to look at each page and see if it needs updating. But that's a lot less than having to create that darn thing from scratch, which we did the first time around. So I'm kind of seeing the 5-year cost not being that great. Now, putting a little bit of money aside so that when we come to that year, we have some extra money to pay for the extra expense, that seems reasonable. But I don't see that we need to put a lot of money in reserve for capital outlays that we have no indication that there's going to be any such thing coming. Currently, there's no expectation of that. So, so my thoughts on it.
Yeah, those are helpful, thank you. I think if we looked at the current year as an example, for fiscal year 25, it's all operating expenses, there's no capital outlay in there. And so those reserves, the target minimum and maximum at 25 and 50%, those are solely based upon operating reserve. So if it were, you know, in a future year, I think we would be looking at a significantly higher budget if there were to be additional capital outlays. But for next year, and to your point, you know, there may not be in the near term significant capital outlays. It is going to be solely based upon the operating expenses. And the operating expenses that we have in there at the moment, you know, we'll talk about it more when we get to the budget, but they're going to be familiar expenses that you've seen before. And so to a certain extent, some of those are just the cost of compliance in maintaining the agency and doing the monitoring to comply with Sigma. And so, I think ideally there's some efficiencies over time and maybe some of those costs can go down, but I think, when we get into budget discussion, it will be informative in terms of the types of expenses that you're gonna see falling routinely, I think, under operating expense.
Inflation's come down, so hopefully we won't see surprises of 25 or 50% on those costs in a single year. That would be.
Mark?
In the presentation, you're saying that, or recommending that we keep a reserve in the 25 to 50% range. In a previous discussion of reserves, a year ago, year and a half ago, we were saying to target a lower end of reserves since agencies, particularly ours, Scotts Valley, are funding most of it. And when you need more money, you're coming to us saying, hey, we need more money.
Yes, and this was a discussion that Gail and I.
So, I'm advocating more for keeping it at the lower end of that range. And the following that I'm seeing is part of the next presentation, but am I seeing 60,000 going from reserves to the budget for 25? So if we do that, then it's putting reserves at about close to the 25% level?
It's higher than that.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, it's about 33.
We're already funding, yeah.
Yeah, I view reserves as the emergency fund, or the disasters, the floods, the fires, and this agency, I don't think deals with any of that. So
I totally hear what you're saying, and that
keep it
was,
at the lower end of this. If there's a guideline that says 25%, okay, but I don't know that there's a requirement.
no, that's why we're having this discussion.
Okay.
Are the primary funding sources, agencies comfortable with 25 as the minimum, or would they rather have it be a bottom end of 10 or 15 and 25 as
I was the one that insisted on an upper level with Tim, as I recall, because it was just gonna be, this is where we wanna keep it. And I was like, well, I'm pretty sure that this board is not looking for this agency to be sitting on a lump of money, right? We don't see ourselves that way, and my initial suggestion was that we have each agency in their own reserves kind of set aside an amount that could be contributed to the I know, I'm saying, this was my idea, it's very creative. Contributed to the Santa Margarita upon, and I know you couldn't do that, but maybe Scotts Valley and
Well, you
San
know, but
Lorenzo
this
could.
means that we don't need to pay.
But anyway, that was not really, didn't fly, the county of Santa Cruz being one, totally understandable. So this is just kind of where we're starting, right? 25% seems like a reasonable minimum. The only reason there was a maximum put on it, because I insisted, because I didn't want it to, so we could say 25% is where we want it to be, or we could say 20% is where we want it to be, and don't have to get into the maximum.
Are we voting on this now, or are we going to go over the budget before we come back and revisit?
We can do it after the budget, if you think that would
Are
inform.
we voting on this?
We are, we don't have to,
Taking input. So,
right now, we are talking about it.
okay.
I would like to,
We are able to vote on it because it's on the agenda.
I would like to urge that it, change the numbers, maybe, lower values, like 10 to 30 or something.
I just wanted to follow up with what the joint powers agreement says, is that this board has the ability to issue assessments for contributions by members in the amount and frequency determined necessary by the board. So you can issue, say, we need more money, guys, and then each member has to pay within 30 days. So a reserve is good because then there's no surprises on members. And I don't think you can get through the Board of Supervisors in 30 days under any circumstances. But you do have quite a bit of financial power just through the agency and through California law.
I mean, I like the idea of the reserve. I think it's prudent. I think it's normally is what agencies, certainly has reserve for certain things. 50 seems a bit high to me, for sure. I think, yeah, and then and maybe the lower end needs to be maybe a little lower. I don't know. We can talk about that. But I like it also being able to be used for, the members' contributions.
Yeah.
And so that, in times when it starts to grow, then that can be applied to those contributions and that kind of, mellows things out. Over the ups and downs.
And that's what's anticipated.
Yeah, so that's where I could kind of see it being used for more, I guess. Thinking that it would be that unless there was some emergency, unanticipated expense that we needed to come.
So actually Ruth is next. And you,
We originally had talked about the idea of having the various agencies available to fund the reserve, fund the agency when needed. But I think with the big fire, we really learned why that could be a bad policy. Because if we had the infrastructure we have now and it all burned and got destroyed, I don't think that San Lorenzo would be in a position to up their contribution. And if we had gotten our infrastructure burned to a crisp, I don't think we would have been in a position to pony up more money. So I'm thinking we should not expect the agencies to do emergency funding.
Jack.
Yeah, I like the idea of some reserve. I agree that the agencies could produce, but we don't know that. I mean, it could be a fire or whatever that could hamper the ability of the agencies to fund them. That said, I don't do double layers of reserves. It probably doesn't matter where it is, but I just, the agencies should have a strong say, obviously, in how they want to fund it. But having some level of reserve here helps. And I really like the concept of smoothing year to year, and reserve helps that happen. So, and from a budget side, you want to have a predictable amount within each year. And so I really like that concept of double contributions and a small reserve.
Mark was kind of,
I like the idea of, leveling, member contributions from an annual basis. That does appeal to me also. But at the same time, I don't see us wanting to, or the need to drive the reserves higher just to be able to do that. It's as though, we're making this agency the bank then. And our agency already has money that,
to leave banked here.
yes, rather than bank it here, we banked.
I understand. Okay.
I'm not an agency, but if I were an agency and my infrastructure got cooked, this would be a lower priority than addressing that, and I would want that reserve back. How would that work? Is this a pull and push, or is this a one-way siphon?
That's a question.
I'm not gonna answer that question, but I'm gonna point out that Director Ackerman has joined the meeting, so she is available. So Director Ackerman, I saw you had your hand up earlier. I wasn't sure if that was just to let us know you were ready to join.
Yeah, I didn't know how to join as a panelist, so thank you.
Great, thank you.
Does any staff have an answer to Eden's question? Nick or Tim?
I don't know the mechanics in terms of how any refunding would work. I do know as part of the audit process, it is reviewed sort of percentage claim on the fund balance based on contributions. So we probably begin by looking at that in that situation, but it'd be hard for me to answer.
Terry has an answer.
Once this board assesses it and collects it, I don't think the member agencies have the power to claw it back. Unless there's a termination of the joint powers agency and a liquidation of all of the outstanding balances, of course, then you would have to spread out the money based on contribution, but I don't think a member agency could claw after it's been assessed and paid.
Yes.
So after a disaster, which is what we're talking about, this reserve fund for, what's more important, getting water delivery to the customers or getting the stream flow gauges back into place? The stream flow gauges and the monitoring wells, they're just data. We're not even using it to do any actionable things, okay? It's data we're collecting to fulfill a requirement by DWR. The emergency thing to do would be to restore everybody's water and infrastructure to their homes. And that the money, if it's kept in the member agencies, and that's where the money is, then they could be done. And then over time, we could go ahead and maybe rebuild our stream.
And the reserves are not necessarily for a disaster. The reserves are for the smooth yearly operation of the agency. Just whatever, and it doesn't have to be 25%, right? It can be whatever we want, but, and initially, I predicted, and I said this to Tim, that this agency is not gonna wanna have a lump of cash sitting in its bank account because we didn't wanna be an agency in the first place. Right? So we don't see ourselves as a water district or as a, and I was pretty certain that this, I know. That the state made us an agency, made us a groundwater district. So we have to deal with it, and we're not required to have a reserve policy. It's a best practice that the state does recommend. So this is a decision of the board. And I want, everyone is obviously engaged. I knew we would. Yes.
Speaking as an agency that also doesn't contribute directly to this.
Yes.
But Eden's question is exactly why I would want some, not a large one, but just because we do have, maybe it may not be as important, but we still have a responsibility as part of this entity to carry on. And we may decide to give the money back. But nonetheless, I like the concept of a small reserve. So there is something there, because if an emergency does happen, we may not have cash coming in. And so I feel an obligation to have something there to protect against that, even while we want to do everything we can to help the agencies with their emergency issues.
Does anyone have an idea of what they would like to see, and then we don't have to vote on this tonight? We can.
A question for staff that might inform that.
Yes.
What do DSOs look like for the contributions from the significant member agencies?
Yes, so.
Daily.
Yes.
How long does it take to get the money from them?
That's the way to say it.
Everything was,
I mean, we say net 30, but does it really happen net 30, or is it more like net 60, net 90?
it's within net 60.
Okay, so that would suggest that you don't really want to reserve much less than 20%. 10% would be too low. You want to be able to cushion the delay that it might take to get any significant funding into the thing. So I would suggest, I'd put forth a notion that, maybe that lower bound is somewhere between 15 and 20%, which I think would cover the DSOs.
And then we don't want to exceed that, and if we did, it would be put towards member contributions.
Which seems to be, the likely outcome, right? You can use it for smoothing.
I mean, I would vote on the lower end. I think it too big, just.
And the number that Doug was just throwing out, that 15, I'm thinking 20%. So we're coming up at a similar. So
Okay.
that's But I don't see the need to go anywhere near the 50%.
Yeah, no, and I, just because it didn't have a cap on it, I said, let's put a cap.
Put a cap on it, so we can discuss what the cap should be.
Or you just make the cap what the amount we decide is, and then that money would get, anything above that would get used in the next year to offset the membership contributions.
Is it appropriate to make a motion?
Sure, it's on the agenda.
20%. We keep it at 20%, we revisit it in 1 year and see if it was sufficient or too high or too low.
Do we include capital like you did, or we go straight operating?
I think straight operating. Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
okay.
And what happened, I mean, is it a point in time when we do our budget that
We do this every year this time, so I would move we establish a financial reserves policy based on 20% cushion on operating expenses, and we revisit it in our meeting of Q2 of 2025 and see if we were.
And if it fluctuates significantly or above or below that,
It's fine, yeah, it's not a crime.
I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor, it's a roll call vote.
Can I clarify
It's
this?
a roll, yes,
There's no min or max, it's just a target of 20%.
Yes.
Always to go to achieve the 20%.
yes. So, I need a roll call vote, because, acting director Ackerman is with us now.
Can I ask a question? Because
Yes.
I didn't understand the last part. I can understand a 20% minimum. I need more clarity, I think, in terms of how we would operationalize maintaining a 20% reserve.
If we exceed that in a year, right, if we get to the end of the calendar year and it's greater than 20%, then we would use that as part of the membership contribution to reduce it down to 20%.
As you did in the current budget where you released 60 grand.
right.
And vice versa, it would come down from the reward.
Do you guys want a trigger to minimize the frequency of micro assessments
Yeah,
of the
annual.
agencies? Is that what would be easier?
One more question.
Hold on, Eden asked Tim a question, sorry, Tim, you were right. Eden?
Yeah. Is the goal to have some sort of a trigger, low and high, so that you're minimizing the number of micro assessments of the agencies?
But I think it also informs the budgeting process, particularly if we're looking at a multi-year budgeting process. And we know that maybe it's not just the next year that we're considering how the reserves factor into. So, there could be the periodic evaluations, just one example, but costs are gonna go up as that periodic evaluation is underway. That's part of why we have the designated fund, that 125,000 in there this year. So I think that was sort of the initial thought process. As Chair Perry mentioned, he wanted to make sure that we considered a cap as the process. So initially, I think we started with the minimum, but I think if we're looking at a target of 20%, and I'm gonna definitely defer to Nick on this because this is, it's realm more so than mine, sort of how feasible it is to operationalize that.
Well, I think it puts those two efforts in conflict in terms of trying to stabilize contributions over the long term, knowing that there's gonna be variable costs different years. It can be done as part of the budget process, it's just helpful to have the reserve policy to fall upon to utilize in terms of planning that we'll have, right, to get sufficient cash if we know in year or two we're gonna find, so.
Yeah. Mark was giving me the eye before you raised your hand.
Okay. As an agency, I'm okay with, we're going to be needing more money in the next upcoming fiscal year. Rather than, us paying more every year to build up a higher reserve. Yes, the appeal of being able to take any excess reserve to even things out or to reduce my annual contribution next year is appealing. But I don't want to pay you more this year so you can charge me less next year necessarily.
Yeah,
So,
I understand. And I think that's what you're seeing in this year's budget,
Yes.
where the reserves were such that were intentionally drawn down to offset the
right.
number of institutions.
But I'm looking at the budget, general reserves, for 2025, being at almost 169,000. That's a significant, portion of our operating budget. That, yeah.
Yeah, we can visit that during the budget. I think operationalizing this is a matter of just establishing, you can have a 20%, you can target a 20% reserve as you do the budget, then on we go, right? And then costs are gonna happen as they happen over the course of the year, but unlikely you're gonna have a 20% swing in expenses up or down, and then you rejigger, the next year, right? Yeah.
And we can work with that.
Yeah, and I think that number, if we just use operational instead of operational and capital, which is the way Tim figured it, will be smaller.
Yes, yes. Because in my mind, the capital are things that, such as this well-monitored program. We were anticipating that a year ahead of time, 2 years ahead of time. We knew that it was coming. We knew we were gonna spend significantly, so we're gonna have to fund that. It's more on the operating side that we need it, not on the capital, since we're able to look far enough ahead.
I agree. Yes.
Someone raised the issue that we don't necessarily need to fund the entire reserve all in this particular budget if need be. We could take 2 years to get there or something. Just as
We certainly could.
depending on when we go look at the budget and figure that out.
And just because we're not meeting our policy, it's not the end of the world. We just plan to make it work out in the long run.
So maybe we should come back and revisit voting on this once we look at the budget. Or you want to vote on it and just say it's a target and then but not talk about how much
Yeah.
you're funding it right at the.
Yes, I think that's reasonable. Okay, so there was a motion
Right.
And a second.
and a second, and we're gonna have a roll call vote with refreshers on the motion. Tim?
Would you like me to restate the motion?
Please,
Okay.
yes.
So my understanding was to revise the proposed policy to, rather than propose a minimum and maximum reserve target, to establish a reserve target of 20% that will be reassessed annually as part of the agency's annual budget review process.
And it'll just be an operating, 20% operating expenses.
Yes. Okay. And in the course of that, I lost who did the first and the second. So
Eden was the first, and I think, was it?
And Cassidy
And for-
and for
Thank you.
the super group of all
Yeah, they were a progressive rock
styles.
band.
Okay, Director
Fifth
Cassidy.
reunion.
Okay, roll call vote. Sorry.
Director Cassidy.
Aye.
Director Dillis.
Aye.
Director Engford.
Aye.
Director Koopman.
Aye.
Director Perry.
Aye.
Director Pollock.
Aye.
Director Smalley.
Yes.
Director Stiles.
Aye.
And we have Director Ackerman online.
I'm going to abstain, but only because I sort of came into the discussion and don't feel like was here for the entire discussion.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Okay. Well done. Now we get to the fun part, the proposed budget.
Onto the budget. I'm gonna share my screen. The budget looks very familiar. It looks a lot like what the board saw in February. I think the biggest difference presentation-wise is the addition of reserves on there. So it's more apparent where the agency is in terms of its reserves. But I'm gonna start with the expenses. The expenses overall are down as proposed for next year by 16%. The slide here, and similar to what you saw, again, at the last meeting in the board packet, it's in the same primary budget categories that you've seen before. So administrative services, we are anticipating a slight increase year to year in administrative services. Part of that is the way that we have, again, we've budgeted conservatively in here. If you look at the current fiscal year's budget of $265,000, we're projecting that we're coming in under budget on that. For the purposes of next year, we did base on a higher number. It may be that we come in under budget as well next year, but we're taking a more conservative approach on that. Yes, Director Cooper.
Is it it's not fixed price contract, it's an hourly, is there some kind of hourly thing in there?
Yes. Yeah. And the other category is professional and contract services. That includes legal, outreach, facilitation, audit, and then the primary category of technical services. There's a second slide that I'm gonna show in a minute that shows a breakdown of what's happening under the technical services there. In terms of general administrative expenses, fairly minor category, a slight budget increase of a couple $1,000s projected for next year. And then as discussed, no capital outlay. So that's one of the big factors driving the overall reduction that you're seeing. In terms of going in a little more detail on the expense categories, the administrative services include both the administrative tasks, so the day-to-day administration of the organization, board support, board meetings, contracts management and oversight, all of those categories. But it also includes the GSP planning and implementation work. So Rob's time and a portion of other RWMF staff time are the two primary components that sit under administrative coordination. When we look at professional contract services, again, jumping straight to the largest cost item there, which are technical services. I'm gonna pause for just a second because I realize I'm not sharing my screen. Yeah, and I wanna share the screen for the folks online. Okay. That includes the groundwater sustainability plan annual report and the associated water level reporting. It includes the monitoring costs and equipment that we talked about at the last meeting as well. The data management system, this is something that is being done in partnership. Well, it's a requirement under SMGWA that we demonstrate how the various monitoring network data is being collected. This is being done through the KISTERS program, Water Information System by KISTERS, that was developed in conjunction with Mid-County. It includes the stream data collection, so the work being done principally by CBEC as well as some services by Balanced Hydrologics. And then the funding mechanisms evaluation. This, again, point of this is looking at what the potential long-term funding approaches and mechanisms may be for this agency. So you're seeing an increase proposed in 25 next year for those services. And the approach that we initially talked about was doing this in conjunction with, again, Mid-County Groundwater Agency as a way to ideally reduce some of the costs on phase one of that work. But that is part of the reason why you're seeing an increase between the current year budget and what's proposed for next year. So let me pause there and see if there's any questions. Yes, Director Cooper.
Yeah, so again, could you refresh us on the funding mechanisms evaluation? That's for a large amount of money, but why are we doing that? What's the drive for that?
So the intent of looking at that is to see how this agency is going to fund long-term compliance with SMGWA. And so looking statewide at what other regions are doing, what are the potential approaches that the agency can take to deal with the cost of compliance? Is it solely through member agency contributions? Are there other potential revenue generating approaches. And so it's working with a consultant who specializes in that. And so there's, I think, a short list of them. And the idea would be to put out either a request for qualifications or a request for proposals to work with a consultant to analyze those.
Yes.
Last meeting to this meeting, tech services went up by 10 grand. Can you tell us where that is?
Yes, so part of that is additional streamflow work. I believe that's the addition of a potential, the station that Rob alluded to that is called out as a data gap in the GSP, but that we haven't been monitoring up to this point. And so
Governor Creek.
there's both on Carbonaro as well as
That would just be for, that's the Carbonaro.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Any questions from Jamie or anyone? Jamie, have you been able to see the budget?
Yes, I can see the screen. Thank you. I don't have any questions right now.
Chris?
Yes.
I did see, an increase in the tech services budget, 20K increase for additional basin monitoring. Going from 50 to 70. This is on page 4.3.
Yeah.
What's that?
One of the 4.3s.
yeah, so you're seeing that reflected here, that proposed 2024 budget is 50,000. Next year's budget jumps up to 70,000, and I think that is in part, it's continuing the stream flow monitoring that's happening in the current year, as well as picking up additional stream flow monitoring locations to inform the assessment of the groundwater dependent ecosystems, as well as Rob, I'm not sure if you want to add to the work that's happening on Carbonaro as well.
Right, the direct difference is $10,000 budgeted for Carbonaro Creek to install the gauge and to monitor it for the course of the year. And the other $10,000 is actually the real-time gauge that's on Bean Creek that has been funded but was not recognized in the budget in previous years. So that was a station that was established 2 or 3 years ago, and that one measures throughout the year. So it costs a little bit more because it actually has a cellular service to collect that data and report on it in real time. So that's the difference between this year's and last year's budget.
So the one will go away. Once we pay for the new monitoring.
Right,
some of
the
that cost will
capital
go away.
on Carbonaro would go away.
And that's, so it's on the order of 10 grand a year for us to have a monitoring point in stream
Is it?
flow.
Because isn't that
Yes.
include installing it, that 10 grand?
No, the Bean Creek is,
No, not the Bean Creek.
well, that's
The Carbonaro.
that's what Director Small is asking about, yes.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the annual additional data collection. Is 10 grand for a single location? Okay. That
So then,
seems very significant.
yeah, that's,
A lot of
it
money.
does, I didn't think it was that expensive either.
Right.
So when we get the new one, every year the new one will cost us 10,000?
No.
No, okay. Explain that again.
Right, yeah, that one is a one-time expense.
Right, so, but monitoring it. See, I think what Director Smalley was saying is monitoring an existing stream gauge, does that cost $10,000 a year?
For the Bean Creek
The Bean Creek
station of the Mackenzie, yes.
because it's such a continuous
It's the only
monitoring.
one that has, right, cellular service that reports in real time.
Do we have a way that we could maybe watch that in real time on the worldwide?
Well,
Sort of a stream cam, do you?
Yes. Well, you can't watch it, there's no video.
No, that's what I'm
You
looking.
can see it, yes, I actually showed it to you at the last,
Okay.
last meeting. Yes.
I'm just kidding. It's easy. Yes,
Back to the funding mechanism evaluation, 5 to 25, is that 25 then just a one-time cost, or is this will that continue year after year?
So we believe that this, and Sierra can supplement this as well, this would be for the evaluation to look at what our options are, and it would include some outreach, public outreach at this time. It would make recommendations for a potential funding mechanism, for example, Prop 26, Prop 218, others. That would not be part of this. So it would be, you would have information to proceed if you wanted to have a fee that was, for example, assessed on parcels or based on groundwater extraction volumes or the like. And then you would make that decision. And moving forward, though, the actual implementation of a fee would be an additional expense.
But this would be, looking at it just for the fiscal year 2025, that's the number. That's going to evaluate and show us or present to us ways that we can then capture fees, funding mechanisms. But we don't know. Right?
And then you would,
Evaluate the options.
yeah, once you know the options, those will be presented to the board will decide whether you want to move forward with any of them or continue as we've been funding ourselves and hope that we get more grant money in the future.
I don't know.
But so what that'll cost in the long run, we just don't know yet.
What do you think, well, I'm just gonna ask, what do you think the possibilities are? Is this just, nobody knows if this is gonna be successful or not? Has it been successful for
Yeah,
other agencies?
Most other agencies are funding some hybrid of contributions based on pumping and contributions from partners, so. We don't do anything based on pumping, except that it helps us inform how much the member agencies contribute right now. So, the non-de minimis pumpers in the basin who are not at the table are not contributing financially right now, even though they are contributing to some of the challenges in the basin. So that's an option to consider, but we don't know. I think what's gonna be hard and there aren't a lot of agencies our size. We are very, very small. We bring in very little, we do very little pumping compared to most of the rest of the basins in the state. So a lot of what works in places where you have large agriculture is not gonna work in this basin. And that's partly why we haven't been able to just kind of figure out on our own what the options are. Because we can't look to other places as models, we're gonna have to figure something out a little bit more on our own. We've looked to what Ukiah is doing, because they are a smaller basin, it's immensely complicated and still relies heavily on ag pumping as one of their revenue streams. So for us here, we're hoping that putting in some money now and some effort to figure out what our alternatives are will also give us a sense of the realistic, outcomes of a Prop 218 seems unlikely, given our needs, but what would that cost and what's the chance of success and how much money could we even justifiably bring in? And those are questions that I think are very valid. It might be that there just isn't a good option, but we just don't know right now. So it's been a long time coming that we take a step back and look at what our alternatives are and then decide where to go from there.
Yeah. How many, I have two quick things. How much non-de minimis pumping is happening? Is this a significant percentage? I thought it was small.
It is fairly small. It's mostly the smaller water systems.
Okay.
And
So not a lot there. I mean, it seems like instead of spending $25,000, that we should just have have a meeting where you get together again and talk about it and save $25,000. I mean, I don't know why we have to spend $25,000 to hire consultants to go get information from other places that they don't have, like, they're not like us, so what are those things gonna come up with? I mean, it just seems like a lot of money to spend just to figure out how should we reapportion things?
it's not so much looking at what other places have done, it's looking at what can we do here? You know, what are our alternatives? How much money could they bring in? How much non-de minimis pumping? How much de minimis pumping is happening? How much are the agencies contributing? And how much are they subsidizing? And are those subsidies okay? Because that is what is happening right now.
How about, should we solicit, through an RFP on the proposals from consultant that might do this kind of work? And give us kind of, a tentative roadmap or suggestions or something else like that. If we as a board see that those suggestions or in particular, one of those proposals is, yeah, I like what I'm seeing here. We haven't thought about this as a group before. Maybe then we've got something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, is there enough collective knowledge here to follow on what Jeff had just said and say, we don't need.
We've done that before. Then
We don't need.
previous iterations.
So I'm okay with us going out. It's some staff time to put together the request. But if you think that staff time is minimal, I'm okay with soliciting proposals.
Yeah, that's what we're doing and, what we're requesting.
Okay. Anybody, anyone else other than Jeff before Jeff goes again?
Well, I kind of hear what Director Smalley's saying, and I kind of feel the same way, like, we're gonna spend the money, but we're not sure what we're gonna get back. If those things are actually gonna be useful, but we're gonna put them, implement them, right? So this is just, hey, here's some money, give us some options, and we may or may not be able to use them. I kind of would like, I know if it's possible, like to know what those, I guess you can't know what those options are until you hire somebody to go out and figure it out. But is there a way we could have some hint at what might be coming at us before we say, okay, yeah, here's something to spend it and figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, I think we know more or less what we would be asking for. We'd be saying, okay, figure out what our budgets are, what is the amount that we want to cover, what are all of the possible, revenue sources within the region that we can get this funding from, pumpers or property owners or whatever. And then what are the options? So we know Prop 218 is a very flexible funding source. It's a hard one to get and you have to be able to justify the money. Prop 26 pays for administration and could help us just cover what we look at mostly operating this, our main thing is operations. It's not capital outlay. We're not doing projects. So Proposition 26.
And that's tax, isn't it? Proposition 26, the way of becoming a taxing agency.
Yes, and then figuring out who would that apply to? Are we looking at, the options are basically what people are doing right now, by parcel size, by pumping, by, use, I don't know, Rob, you can step in. I mean, there's any number of ways to look at it, and I think that bringing in a professional who does this will help us come up with some creative alternatives, potentially. One thing that we have talked about is doing this jointly with Mid-County, doing a joint contract with them, because they're also looking into this, which would probably lead to some substantial cost savings, but because we haven't talked to any contractors or consultants yet about this, because we didn't want to get ahead of ourselves, we don't actually know what it's going to cost. So, we could come up with a process to involve some board members in developing that if we want. We don't generally do that for contracts of this small of an amount, but.
So this is just a budgeted number, not necessarily what it's gonna cost.
Yes, it is a budgeted number.
Okay, Jack, you haven't spoken yet, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Is this looking at the county's current share of costs? Is that essentially what it's doing?
It's looking at the entire agency.
Looking at everything, so both, it would be covering what's within the Scotts Valley Water District,
Oh, yes.
Shannon's Valley Water District, and the
Yes,
unincorporated.
and the
parts.
initial impetus for this was San Lorenzo Valley Water District being concerned that they were paying more than they could cover in some previous years, so that's how it started out getting on the budget in the $5,000 amount, which isn't enough to do much with, so then we upped it to 25,000 this is probably a more realistic amount to think of, but it would be re-examining all aspects of how we're funding the agency and then making different alternative options and possibly recommendations for the board's consideration.
To the extent any fees were implemented with the right process, that would reduce the amount that each of the water districts and the county would be paying. Offset.
It would potentially offset them, yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, we didn't spend $5,000 last year.
We did not spend $5,000.
Okay, Eden, and then we're gonna finish up with Jeff or Ruth.
No,
Let me just make sure that I've got this right by paraphrasing it, right? So we're considering that we would hire, or we would put out an RFP to find a consultant, someone expert in this line, to give us creative ideas for other revenue sources. The big ticket potential ones being grant possibilities, non-de minimis pumpers paying their share, and de minimis pumpers. Is that
Potentially,
included? I hear that as part of it.
It
Those are the
potentially
big,
could
Or
be.
taxing, I'm getting.
If it was a tax, yeah.
okay, and those are the big three sort of low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, I would actually take grants out of that because
Okay.
grants is always going to be,
Okay.
we would never not pursue a grant.
Okay. And is the mid-county agency currently have an appetite for this de minimis pumper exploration?
Yes, I mean, it's a paper exercise to see what the options would be and how much could you get versus how much would it cost with a population as small as ours.
Yeah, I personally don't need to do a paper exercise to advocate for private well owners that are de minimis users, that we be included in that, so.
Yeah.
I would be intensely against it. So I don't need to pay a consultant to explore whether or not I should be further taxed.
Jeff.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm curious, what's the historical reason why Santa Cruz is contributing a small percentage? The city of Santa Cruz, we've established, we can stipulate that a large amount of water flows out of this aquifer, especially during the dry portions of the year, and that's a large source of their water. And yet they have representation on this board for that reason. And we've discovered that process, but we're locked into a model where they're not paying a very large share, and I don't know what the historical reasons are where you guys worked it out that way. There's some reason.
I think we were
Scotts
generous
Valley has a
enough to
lot
write a
of.
check.
Yes, I think they were nice enough to do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. We pumped this much, right, out of the ground.
No,
Yeah.
but it's already been decided that it's the stream flow is part of the aquifer activity, right? The flowing out of the aquifer. That's part of the whole process here, is that we have to make the, you guys satisfied with the amount of water that you get out of this aquifer, that's part of our.
And then we could talk about the amount we spend cleaning up the nitrogen in the water that y'all contribute. So I don't think you want to go down that path. It gets complicated and expensive, right? We're dropping $150 million at a water treatment plant in order to make sure that we're able to adequately clean the water to new and emerging standards that's coming out of that river.
Yeah, I think that we've worked out a very good arrangement that I think Santa Cruz has been very gracious in participating. They're not really a member agency or like San Lorenzo and Scotts Valley and the county are. City of Scotts Valley being really not part of this, doesn't contribute anything. And
It's the
like we
same
said,
residents.
yes, of course, ratepayers. I think that, I think the board, I'll speak for myself, but I think the board was happy with the arrangement we have at Santa Cruz. And
Just
technically,
curious.
I mean, you could make,
Curious why you guys worked it out.
I'll say satisfied.
satisfied, we are satisfied with the
Yes.
arrangement. We did because Santa Cruz wanted to put something in as a matter of goodwill and a matter of recognizing that they have a stake in all of this working out. And they wanted to shoulder some of the burden. I'd say they were generous enough to look at the big picture and shoulder some of the burden.
Because if we did a rate study based on the volume of water that comes out of our aquifer, who's consuming it, that rate study would indicate that there's a large amount of water coming out of aquifer for consuming. So that if we did that rate study, it might indicate that Santa Cruz, the city of Santa Cruz would be on the hook for a larger portion of the expense. That's just, with that was the way that they were using it by volume of water.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't tell you that.
I mean, I think that, you know, that's a great discussion. I think it's a different topic. I think, you know, the method or the breakdown of contributions here was, everyone's been comfortable with it for quite a long time since it was set up. It can be adjusted as needed. But, you know, it's not just financial contributions. There's a lot of sweat equity and expertise contributions coming from sources that aren't, you know, necessarily in the same ratio as the monetary contribution. So that's a different topic.
So anyway, we were talking about the budget. And we are deciding whether we're gonna leave an earmark for money we haven't decided to spend yet, but that we may in the future decide to spend on a study to look at possible other funding sources for this agency, because there was a time, and probably still will be a time in the future, when people were worried about what agencies were contributing and figuring if there was a way to spread the joy of unfunded mandates by the state of California that we could call Regulation Nation if we wanted to. And so I think that,
I like what Mark suggested, that we do the RFP, we get some, it doesn't cost us anything or barely anything to get some opinions. Yeah, it costs some staff time. We get some opinions and some ideas, but I don't think we set aside $25,000 to pay for what we're not sure we'd be interested in, you know, pursuing.
Well, then what would you be, if there's not a line item in the budget, we can't.
Can't really put
Something.
that would be a real, I mean, it's already, Mark is already pushing the envelope of trying to get some free advice. But I know, I'm not explaining, but I'm saying, we need to have a fig leaf of like, we've got a line item in our budget.
And it has to be realistic.
When you get the proposals, don't those have to come in front of this board?
Yes.
Yeah.
Doesn't the board have to say, okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're not spending.
No, we're not. No, we're not. That's what I'm saying. I say, put it in the budget, we're setting it aside.
Yeah, but we're putting an allocation in the budget.
And if we don't use it, it'll go back to the member agencies.
Exactly.
They'll be able to see that we put aside $25,000. All the bids are gonna come in at $25,000.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. I wish it worked that way.
With a little bit of information, we could maybe come under a fraction of that.
Okay, I think we need to move on.
Yes.
Okay, so we looked at expenses. I'm gonna take us through what the proposed revenue looks like, so you can see, again, this was in your board packet, so I won't spend too much time reiterating what's in the packet, but you can see the proposed contributions for next year have decreased. We have used reserves as a way to partially cover those expenses, which is a way to reduce the contributions from the contributing agencies. Overall, you're looking at a 35% reduction. If you look again at the individual agencies that are contributing, you've got the relative percentages. To Director Koopman's question, the contributions have been a prior discussion at board meetings, but what we're looking at for next year is a reduction for the member agencies as well as the city, but an increase for Mount Herman, which brings them more into line with the current use in the basin. It does fully reconcile that, but it increases it from, I believe it was 2.5% in prior years. The addition, this is the part that you didn't see at the February meeting, is where we are in terms of reserves. So it just came off of the reserve policy discussion. Again, that's partially, the policy is to help inform us as we're going through the budgeting exercise of sort of what's appropriate to maintain. So the as proposed, based upon the estimated actuals for the current year, we have an ending reserve at 353,000. That carries over into the beginning reserve for next year. We've drawn that down 60,000 as mentioned by offsetting the contributions. That leaves 168,000 in general reserves. There's a footnote here. A couple of people commented that the footnote was not visible in the packet. Apologies for that. That footnote said that under the proposed policy, the minimum reserve was at 25%. We'll obviously take what we've heard here tonight in the reserve policy going forward, but that's what the footnote pertained to. And then we have 125,000 set aside for the periodic evaluation. We anticipate work will begin on that in fiscal year 26 and 27. It is, that work is not too far away. So we're able to draw down some of the reserves in order to fund those costs. And so I believe that's the, there's one more side. This is just a chart to try to convey as well what you're seeing in that table. The green bars there represent revenue. You're seeing revenue from the agency contributions in the dark green. The lighter green shows revenue in the form of grant monies. For next year, you see we have utilized all the grant funds, so that grant funding piece goes away. The orange colored bars there are representing expenses. You're seeing both operating expenses in the dark orange color and capital outlay expense in the lighter orange. So again, with the improvements to the monitoring network done, we're not seeing that proposed for next year. The ending reserves are shown in the blue line there. So that's sort of an indication of where those reserves stand based upon the current proposed budget. And then as proposed in the reserve policy, the minimum and maximums were shown as part of next year's operating reserve, just to give a sense of what those look like. Clearly, we've heard tonight with the passage of that policy at setting that at 20% going forward, but really that was intended just to be sort of a frame of reference as you're looking at the numbers here. So, and so I think that's it in terms of the proposed budget. In terms of information sharing, I realized there were some questions in the midst of that. We do have Accounting Director Ackerman who's still online as well. So just looking to see if I'm not seeing a hand raised there.
And is there anyone in the audience additionally?
We have a number of people in the audience. I'm not seeing any hands go up among those folks.
Anyone else here in the room?
Yes.
Besides directors? Okay, then go.
You'd shown the 1.25 carved out in anticipation of the periodic review. Do we anticipate additional additions to that sequestered reserve in future budgets? Or is this like the one time we're gonna be putting reserve money aside for that specific purpose?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that may be the one time in this cycle, and that would start to offset costs in the next 2 years. However, that remains to be seen, but that may not cover the full cost of the periodic evaluation.
There'll be a
So
line
some of the
item.
member,
Yeah, all right. And so then I would mindful that the reserve policy has been changed from what you brought, off the top, would you suggest a change? Or what's the flight path gonna be to getting what's nominally a 33% general reserve down to the target 20?
One path would be if we build in full in prior years, we could bill as needed throughout the course of the fiscal year with consultation with the executive team. I mean, I think that's,
I mean, I guess the question is, do you want to try to take it to 20 as part of this budget? Would that be a change the board would want to propose? Or would staff prefer to do it, say, over 2 years?
I think you should do it.
Take it. I mean, we just set the policy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You just set the policy.
yeah. So,
We have to make that adjustment. And then I just don't mean to draw this out ridiculously, but, so why isn't the 125 just part of that reserve policy?
It could be just part of the reserve policy. It's called out as a designation just to make it transparent to the board that the intent is to utilize that for the GSP.
Right.
I think it's a good idea.
So it's
Okay.
kind of designated.
I think it is
Just
also.
curious.
Designated reserve.
Yeah.
Because that's doing something we've never done before. That'll be the first time.
And
we've
then
done
maybe
this, right?
when we have maybe that we have an investment policy, maybe you can make some money on that. Probably get 5% per year. On a safe, totally safe, CD or something like that.
Yeah.
Put it in video.
Put it in video. Okay,
Well, then, so I think the question it raises for me is whether or not the reserve policy is going into effect, and is going to affect the member agency contributions as proposed for the current year, or whether it's for next year. If it's for the current year, then, it's gonna revise, obviously, it's gonna revise the amounts as proposed in your budget.
I think
That's the proposal, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, if I were to make a motion, that would be in the motion.
That was the intent.
That's what I'm asking for staff's response before we do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not seeing heartburn,
Yeah.
Right. Does
no
it,
gastric distress.
yeah, does it create an inordinate amount of work and change it for this year versus taking that?
Well, it's not gonna cause 60 grand, which is gonna refund.
But we've already allocated them. The
Yeah,
money's already allocated there, and it's gonna cost us another 10 grand in staff time to go make those changes for the rest of this year. Do we simply recognize that instead of 60,000 from reserves for 2025, that should be 80,000, 85. I'm pulling out a number here and reflect it there.
do it in 2 steps then.
Maybe.
This from the guy who didn't want to reserve.
No, I wasn't saying no, sir.
There's no way it costs 10,000 in staff time.
I'm just pulling numbers out.
There's no way.
So, okay, just to be clear, because I'm not seeing much response from staff.
Right.
What would be the problem with just redoing the budget with our new policy that we just voted on?
I would just want to be clear that the board, typically the board is approving the budget as proposed, and so everybody's clear on the numbers that are coming to the board for approval. I don't think we're clear through these discussions on how that 20% actually translates to this year's contributions. If I'm hearing, this is going in effective fiscal year 25. So
Yes.
you are, I mean, we could clearly take that direction and do that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's sufficient. I think that's not a scenario I've been in before, so I will look to others here to say whether or not approval of a budget that isn't designated the actual amounts.
They're only gonna go down.
A conceptual, right?
I would think I could speak for all the board members that we don't need to know the actual numbers to know they will look better. Right?
That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm fine with approving a conceptual budget based on the new policy.
I mean, we're
That
approving
we
the
just
expenses,
established.
which is what you guys really care about.
Yeah,
What would be the easiest and most transparent way for you guys to implement this into this budget?
I think we can implement it either way. If we have clear direction, if the direction is 20%, we
Yeah,
can punch the
that's
numbers.
it.
Okay.
simple. I think it's just,
It wasn't
very
clear to me whether or
transparent.
not the board needed to
68 minus
approve
100,
the budget,
68 grand,
and the contributions
drawdown,
in
128.
full without having the actual numbers in front of them.
Could you repeat that? Was that
Sorry.
two conversations?
I'm sorry.
I was saying that if the board is approving the expenses as proposed, which I'm hearing, I thought I was hearing they were, then the part that is changing from what's proposed in the budget memo is the agency contribution piece, correct?
Yes.
Because we would be drawing down reserves further
Correct.
with an aim of getting to that 20% general reserve. So
Yeah,
what we're-
20% of the operating expenses.
Mhm. And so what we are, what would need to be calculated, what we're not giving you tonight is the exact number of what that contribution looks like from the individual.
We're just gonna vote on this because we don't want to send Nick up to his 10 key and have him figure out what the heck is going on right this second. But since we have a policy and it's pretty obvious what that is, and Nick can make that happen, I think this board is willing to vote on a budget in that fashion unless Terry tells us that would be illegal.
I don't think it's illegal.
Okay. So do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Can we take public comment any before? we
Yeah, public comment?
I'm not seeing any hands go up among the attendees. I'm not seeing any hands go up in the room.
Okay, so roll call?
Director Cassidy,
Aye.
Director Dillis.
Aye.
Director Edinburgh.
Aye.
Director Koopman. Director Perry.
Aye.
Director Pollock.
Aye.
Director Smalley.
Yes.
Director Stiles.
Aye.
And Director Ackerman.
Yes.
Okay, passes unanimously. I don't think, Chair Perry, I'm gonna, step back
Yes,
for 1 second. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
I don't think we took public comment on the reserves policy.
You
I'm
are
not
correct.
saying any
You are
hands
100%
go up,
correct.
but just to
I
confirm,
thought of that, but it was over and I thought, well, there it is.
Perry
Do you
was
want
the
it brought
best
back
way
and-
to rectify that.
We can ask for public comment now, just to get it on the record, and
Okay.
move on.
Is there any public comment on the prior item 4.2 reserves policy? I'm not seeing any hands go up online, and I'm not seeing any hands in the room. Thank you. Okay, we are on to item 4.4. Pull that up, share my screen for a second. This is a contract renewal for Montgomery and Associates. So go there and take it from there. While I'm doing that, just by way of reminder, this did go out for a request for proposal, request for qualifications prior to last year, and so we are now into the second year. The board approved the year one, authorized the general manager to execute the professional services agreement and for the year one services. So now we're coming back. It's part of that same hydrologic support services contract and outlines the services for next year in the amount of 61,000. So
And that's a budget, I don't think we spent the full amount last year that we estimated in the budget. Is that correct, Montgomery?
yes, that is correct. So, and so we have 61,000 allocated for next year. It's split across the different categories in the budget that we just looked at, which includes the annual report preparation, the uploading of the data as part of the Sigma reporting, and then as needed technical support. And so the action before the board is to authorize the general manager to execute that professional services agreement.
I'll move that.
Okay. Second. Okay. Roll call vote or discussion and then public comment? Public
Who
comment?
was the second? I'm sorry, I missed who the second was.
It was Doug.
Okay. Okay, let me see if we have any hands going up. No hands going up. So,
Okay.
Director Cassidy,
Aye.
Director Dillis,
Aye.
Director Engberg,
Aye.
Director Koopman,
Aye.
Director Perry,
Aye.
Director Pollock,
Aye.
Director Smalley,
Yes.
Director Stiles,
Aye.
and Director Ackerman.
Yes.
Okay. Passes unanimously.
Okay.
We are on to, this is an administrative item, the next one, which is 4.5, and the agency receives its insurance via the Association of California Water Agencies Joint Powers Insurance Authority, pardon me, that's a mouthful, Aqua JPIA. And as a part of that, the board may designate a director and an alternate representative that can be either a director or an officer or a staff member to participate in the annual voting. Aqua hosts a conference twice a year, and so up to this point, Chair Perry has been acting in that capacity. But at this point, we need to appoint or renominate either a continuation of that and an alternate. And so those are the two seats. And Chair Perry, do you want to add anything, having done this for many years?
Done it for many years for Scotts Valley and for this agency now. It's the JPIA, the Joint Powers Insurance Authority, their meetings are, every agency is a board member. So it's 100+ people in a room with voting fobs. Voting on things, so, it's great to be there, it's good to get the information, see what an awesome, really great organization. And we get a lot of value for there, it's a, nonprofit. Yeah, Dave,
You get to vote twice.
I do.
Hmm.
I do.
Two votes.
I do, double bob. And, anyway, it's not critical, your vote is, pretty diluted. So, but I try to be there, and Scotts Valley has always had a staff backup because, a staff member could always just say, we could say, you've got to go to Aqua this year. So anyway, Pierrette used to be our backup and Dave is now our alternate. And since we're very active as an agency in Aqua, I would propose, if it was up to me, that Dave be the alternate for this agency also. Because there's a good chance he would be there.
And are you willing to continue?
I am willing to continue. Two hands, two claps.
In that case, I move, do we have to have some
Nominate.
discussion?
Nominate.
Nominate.
I'll ask after you nominate.
Okay, Director Perry as to be our delegate to JPIA and our alternate be Dave McNair.
I'll second that.
Okay, is there any public comment on that to say they don't want me to do that?
I am not seeing any hands go up online,
Yes. Yes.
Thanks about this.
and I'm not seeing any hands in the room.
Okay, then just, I guess we need a roll call.
Okay, Director Cassidy,
Aye.
Director Dillis,
Aye.
Director Engler,
Aye.
Director Koopman,
Aye.
Director Perry.
Aye.
Director Pollock,
Aye.
Director Smalley,
Yes.
Director Stiles,
Aye.
and Director Ackerman.
Aye. And I just wanted to add that I work for an agency with a 37-member board, so I feel the pain.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Okay, next is access agreement for stream flow monitoring on Ziante Creek.
Yes, one of the new locations that I would really prefer that we were able to monitor this year, that once a month going out and doing a manual recording is on private property. And we've approached the owner, they are willing to allow access, but they want an agreement to spell out, this is gonna be for 2 years. You're gonna give us a 1-week notice. Your CBEC, which would be our contractor, they will have insurance to avoid any issues. And Terry's already working on a draft, but we worked far enough along with the landowner to disclose who that is, so we didn't have a full draft. But we would like permission so that we can get that monitoring going as soon as we're able to work out with the landowner. They're planning a wedding this week, so they're a little busy.
Okay, so, I guess you need a motion from us and a vote, okay?
So moved.
And second.
Okay, yes, fine.
Is there a cost? to
No,
our
no cost,
They're letting us come in and do this.
yes.
Good citizens.
Yes.
And any comment, any public comment?
Let's take a look. I am not seeing any hands go up online, and I don't see any hands in the room.
Okay, can I get a roll call?
Okay, Director Cassidy,
Aye.
Director Dillis.
Aye.
Director Engler,
Aye.
Director Koopman.
Aye.
Director Perry.
Aye.
Director Pollock. Director Smalley,
Yes.
Director Stiles,
Aye.
and Director Ackerman.
Yes.
Their financial reports are contained in the agenda. Does anyone have any discussion about those? Okay.
I'll just mention that I called up Nick and was wondering why in the world we have labor compliance monitoring when we have no employees, but he explained that that was part of a contract earlier.
Okay. And, what was I gonna say? No, we don't take any action on that. Anyone from the public who's looked closely at our agenda, wanna comment on?
Not seeing any hands go up online.
Okay. Then we have staff reports. Anything else from staff? 5.2, I don't think that's kind of covered. Any director reports? I will just say, I did go to since this came up, I went to the Aqua Convention in Sacramento. And one of the subcommittees I'm on is the groundwater subcommittee. And the focus of that was how many basins are in a state of non-compliance. And the state was I think there's 12 that are not.
Six basins,
Excuse me?
6 basins.
Well, 6 basins.
And there are, some of them have multiple GSAs.
Right, I think there are 12 that the reports were kicked back, and there's 6 basins that are really gone to the woodshed. Right, and one of them is Tulare Lake, I believe.
Right.
And they had a woman there speaking to us who was a member of that staff on that agency. And I know for a while we were talking about, well, if we didn't do something, the state would be, they don't even know what we're doing, they're slow. Their enforcement is strong and sudden, and they're probably gonna get taken over by the state. And, I mean, they,
Just did.
what's that?
One of them just did. There was an article in the paper.
This, I think that was probably too large, literally haven't done it yet, but just the idea of the magnitude we're talking about. You know, our acre feet are in the, 2,800, talking 233,000 acre feet that they're pumping over their sustainable limit.
Oh.
So their sustainable limit is almost half the amount, double. They're pumping double their sustainable limit. And that doesn't even include their de minimis users. And they have 2,000 of those. So they're all just kind of sitting there going, what are we gonna do? So they're working on it, but, we were not the focus of any of this. I mean, I'm personally, I know I shouldn't even say this, but I'm hoping we're on the path to finding a way out of having this agency be as active as it is. I don't think the state wants to talk about that yet, but I think that it's gonna be possible in the future. I just, they never talk about things that they don't wanna talk about. But anyway, that was kind of sobering to hear all that, but that's all I have. Yes,
You mentioned earlier you had a draft letter.
I do, I'm gonna read, I did say I'd read it directly before, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So, it says, Dear Gab, on behalf of the Board of Directors and the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency, I wish to express our gratitude for your years of dedicated service contributions as a member of the board, including your leadership serving multiple terms as chair or vice chair. Your knowledge, expertise, and attention to detail greatly benefited the agency by serving to inform the development of the groundwater sustainability plan and management actions in the basin. You steadfastly represented the interests of the San Lorenzo Valley and the broader community in considering how effectively to meet the obligations of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act while keeping a focus on approaches and management actions that best meet the needs of the basin. Thank you for your commitment towards the shared goal of sustainable groundwater management in the Santa Margarita Groundwater Basin. Your contributions are greatly appreciated and will continue to help steer the agency on a path towards successful implementation of SGMA in years ahead. We wish you all the best in your coming activities and endeavors, and maybe running for Soquel Creek Water. I don't know. No, I didn't say that. And I'm gonna sign it and send it off with everyone's approval.
Here. Well done.
Alright, and we'll put this in the agenda, in the minutes, so it'll be reflected in the current record. Okay?
Thank you for putting that together.
Thank you, staff. But yes, and so does that take us to the terminal?
I had the information.
Oh, yes, thank you. Informational item.
As an informational item, the county in partnership with the Bay Foundation, which is based in Morro Bay, is doing a free well water quality testing program right now. We have a grant, the county has a grant from the State Water Board, and the Bay Foundation, they get their funding from, it's a violation, I'm not exactly sure, but they have in the past offered this in other counties, and they have recently started working in Santa Cruz County. The timing was really well because of the grant that the county has. We're actually able to expand the contaminant list that they are testing for and offer for any resident who meets certain income qualifications and has an exceedance of any MCL, we will help fund treatments and bottled water delivery for the duration of our grant, which is in the process of being extended, but it's for probably at least 2 to 3 years. And that would include a point of use treatment system, which we would then maintain for the duration of the grant, after which it would become the property owner's responsibility. But this is really the first time we've ever offered anything like this in the county, and we know that there are wells throughout the county that have never been tested for many of these contaminants, and some that have probably never been tested at all writ large. So it's exciting. The data collected, this is non-regulatory, we're not doing anything with it. The data does go into Gamma though, so it will help us as an agency because that data is data that we can then use to see areas of contamination that we might not have previously been aware of because Gamma is only as good as the data that's in it, which is pretty minimal right now in a lot of our areas. So I have a bunch of flyers and these are like bigger handouts. The flyers are bilingual. If anybody wants to take one now, but then we can share that information with the board and probably in maybe our next email blast.
Great.
But it'll be going on for a long time, so.
Wonderful.
That's great.
Cool.
What's the county doing to get the word out to the private well owners?
So our outreach has mostly been focused in South County right now because that's where we know we have very severe groundwater contamination issues that are potentially impacting well owners who don't know. So we've done, we've had articles in the Favronian and in the Aptos Times. We've done emails to all the parents of PVUSD. We've done 3 days of flyer and poster distribution from basically South Aptos down to the county border. And then we've reached out to all the churches and all the community groups down there. So that's been where we focus primarily. There is going to be a round of mailers going out. Again, we've selected mostly within South County, but also in the Bonnie Doon area where we know we potentially have at least some elevated natural contaminants. People are gonna be getting postcards in the mail that are gonna look very much like this. And those are going out June 3rd. So after that, we're gonna be doing some door-to-door knocking again in very specific neighborhoods in South County where we know we have disadvantaged communities and wells and known water quality issues. So that's the only place we're gonna be going as far as door-to-door with bilingual staff. And Community Water Center is gonna help us with some of that. After that, we're gonna see what sort of success we've had. We had in the first week and a half, which was only like 3 weeks ago that we launched this, we got 50 calls, so
That's great.
that's pretty great, yeah. Yes,
I know this is to help people, but will there be wells that will be red tagged?
no, this is non-regulatory.
Okay.
We actually don't have the authority to red tag people's wells, as long as they're not a water system
Mhm.
or these water quality issues. But I certainly hope that if people have, really elevated contaminants, that they do contact us to work out some solutions.
How many people do you think you can help, or how many, what's your budget?
Oh, the grant was $600,000, and that doesn't include most of the testing, so we can probably help anybody. Because it's income restricted, so we can only help people who make 80% of the mean household income for the county. The testing is free for anybody, there's no income restrictions on that. But the assistance is limited.
That's great.
Yeah, it is.
Excellent. Okay. Boy, did everyone look at that Western Groundwater Conference in Olympic Valley at the top? That's ridiculous. Anyway.
Destination.
It sure is. Boy, I got to go to Sacramento for Aqua. That was awesome. Anyway, okay, so I think we have reached the end of our fabulous night. That was a lot of work. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it, and see you next week.